Hi everyone. Welcome back to Woo Can Cook. My name is Wesley, and this is a show where we are slowly cooking our way through all of the food from my childhood. Today we're diving back into our series dedicated to TV and film with a long overdue shot at the jjapaguri or Ramdon from the movie Parasite.
짜파구리가 뭐야?
Okay, so a couple of items to address here. First off, I am well aware that this movie came out several years ago, and I'm probably the 1 millionth YouTuber to recreate this dish. The main reason that I never really got around to this one is really just because it's not that complicated, interesting, and most importantly, it just doesn't sound very tasty or like something that any of you are actually going to make. For those unfamiliar, in this scene, the family has requested their housekeeper to make a dish known as jjapaguri, which is the combination of both chapagetti and neoguri instant noodles, topped off with hanwoo beef, or in other words, an extremely expensive cut of Korean steak, similar to Japanese wagyu. Personally, I've been skipping this dish since the movie came out because, well, frankly, I don't want to stir-fry Japanese wagyu. This just feels like a crime against everything that I personally believe in, and more importantly, it's probably not something that you guys are gonna do. More recently, though, as you can plainly see, I did change my mind because the idea here is that they're just making a very simple noodle dish using extremely high-quality ingredients. The thought came to me that it might be interesting to instead dive into what this dish might actually look like if it was made with appropriately high-quality ingredients, and how that might look radically different from a simple instant ramen. So, for our version today, we'll be diving into how to make this actual sauce base from scratch, plus what a high-quality stir-fried beef cut actually looks like, and more importantly, why it makes no sense to stir-fry Japanese wagyu. Okay, so let's get into it. Okay, so diving right in, we're starting things off here with our veggies. The chapagetti noodle is an instant Korean jjajang noodle dish which can contain a wide variety of large diced veggies. Up first, for us, this is 4 cloves of crushed and minced garlic for our aromatics, followed by some large diced onions and red bell pepper. Personally, I do think that these are the most appropriate additions to a jjajang sauce, but you'll also find that this dish can contain any number of additional veggies though, including zucchini and edamame, which are 2 of my personal favorites. Rounding this all off, I'm also going to julienne about 4 inches of cucumber here as well to use as garnish. This might feel like a really small detail, but I actually find that the cucumber garnish in a jjajang sauce is particularly critical because of how it cuts through the richness of the sauce. Up next, moving on to our steak. Now, let's take a second and talk about cuts of steak. I don't personally have wagyu in my freezer because it's really expensive. Instead, I do have this gorgeous USDA prime cut of New York strip steak. You'll notice that it has a lot of beautiful marbling and a perfectly shaped fat cap on the end, which I specifically selected for exactly this reason. Both of these details are pretty critical in getting a tender steak with a good sear, in my opinion, if you plan on grilling or skillet searing a New York strip. If we were going to slice this up into cubes for a stir fry, as they do in the movie, none of that marbling really matters because you're just gonna fry it over high heat anyway. On top of this, we'd also most likely trim off this huge fat cap too and just toss it in the garbage because we don't want a chunk of fat to end up in our stir fry, which is just an absolute shame. We would literally be throwing away huge chunks of this very expensive steak. So instead, I have this gorgeous beef sirloin tip from the homies from Prather Ranch, which has been specifically selected for stir fries like this. It's lean with very little marbling, making it ideal for thinly slicing and stir frying in a wok. This is the gold, y'all. Now, as you may notice in the film, the steak that they used is actually chopped into cubes, which again is an absolute crime because it's not going to cook consistently in a stir fry like this. So instead, for our version, we're slicing our sirloin tip into thin strips, slicing against the grain as much as possible to keep these from becoming chewy. You may notice that this is a similar chop that we use for most beef stir fries, like Mongolian beef or beef chow fun, for exactly this reason. Finally, rounding this all off, since we are not in fact using wagyu, we are instead going to do a quick velveting process to help tenderize our steak. This is a half teaspoon of baking soda dissolved in water, which we're combining with our steak for about 15 minutes to start breaking down the protein bonds of the steak. This will in turn yield for us a nice tender piece of beef without the price tag of Japanese wagyu. You just saved yourself $75. You're welcome. 15 minutes later, we're draining off this excess baking soda slurry, then combining our steak in a quick marinade of 4 tablespoons of soy sauce, followed by a single tablespoon of sesame oil for a little bit of added fat, and a half teaspoon of white pepper. This is going to marinate for an additional 15 minutes while we assemble the chapagetti portion of our dish next. Okay, so diving into our sauce here, the sauce used in a jjapaguri or Ramdon as seen in the film would be the sauce packet from the chapagetti, which is a pretty straightforward Korean jjajang sauce made from Korean black bean paste, and is also in fact actually a dish that we have made on this channel already, so we'll be largely drawing from that recipe today. First, this is 4 tablespoons of soy sauce to start, followed by a single tablespoon each of rice vinegar for some brightness, mirin for some sweetness, and brown sugar for some malted sweetness. Then finally, as promised, the main ingredient for today, this is 4 tablespoons or a quarter cup of Korean black bean paste. This is going to be the big bold umami driver of our sauce that's going to create all of that deep umami and richness that this dish is known for. Over on the stove, we're diving into the neoguri portion of our dish today, which would be the other instant noodle that this dish is combined with. Neoguri uses thinner styled udon noodles cooked in a seafood based broth to give us a more fishy umami quality. To recreate that seafood broth, we're going to make a quick dashi stock from scratch, which I think is going to step up the umami in our dish quite a bit. This is 3 dried anchovy and a single sheet of kombu sea kelp going into my saucepan, along with 2 cups of water simmered for 20 to 30 minutes before straining. I'm setting this aside for a moment while we boil our udon noodles here. I believe in the film they actually combined both the udon and ramen noodles together, which I imagine has to be just very weird. For our version instead, I'm just going with udon because I think the jjajang sauce is going to cling to it a lot better. I'm straining this and setting it aside once it has been cooked to package instruction, then heating my wok over medium heat so that we may sear our steak next. You'll notice I did start adding this one piece at a time before I got really lazy. What's really critical here is that we're getting as much surface area contact as we possibly can so that we may maximize the amount of sear on our steak. I'm searing this for 2 minutes over medium heat before turning the fire up to high and tossing with the wok tilted downward for wok hei. Finally, diving into our veggies next, I'm removing my steak from the wok, reheating over high heat one more time, then adding in my garlic here for 15 seconds until nice and fragrant. Then here's my bell pepper going in for about a 45-second head start before we add in our onions. I'm tossing this all for another minute before returning our steak to the wok, followed by my sauce mixture and dashi broth. You'll notice I'm using my dashi broth to loosen up the residual sauce left behind in the bowl too. Finally, this is a cornstarch slurry going in, comprised of 2 tablespoons of cornstarch dissolved in water, which we're tossing until a thickened sauce begins to form. Then last up, here's my udon going back into the wok, which we're just tossing quickly to combine. I'm finishing this all off with cucumber to garnish, and we're ready to eat. Okay, so let's start with the fundamentally most important detail here. This is really, really good, and I mean easily the best jjajang noodle that I have ever had, in my opinion. The sauce is deeply rich and umami driven without being overwhelmingly salty, and our steak is tender and slightly chewy, all assisted by both the way that it was chopped and the way that it was marinated and velveted. I think another key step here is that the depth of flavor that comes from our jjajang sauce is very much driven by the fishy umami from our dashi stock, not just the black bean paste. This just adds a whole complexity of flavor to our sauce that would otherwise not have been there if it was just black bean paste. I will also say that I know more typically this dish would be served with diced pork belly, which is perfectly acceptable, but I think thinly sliced sirloin may take the cake for this dish though. It just adds so much more texture to the dish that you don't normally get with pork belly that absolutely drives this dish home for me. All this said, dear God, please don't add cubed steak to this dish. Just no. Okay, so that's it everyone. I hope you enjoyed this and I hope you give this one a shot. For those who are new to the channel, this one is part of a larger series dedicated to foods from TV and film, so definitely check out that series next if you haven't yet because there's a lot of these. As always, like, comment, subscribe, share, be nice interneters, and I'll see you soon.